I've worked for leaders that have left quote unquote bodies in their wake, but they get amazing results. So they are continuously rewarded for those results. They're never measured on the 52 people that they've left in their wake that are drowning or just miserable. They're not measured on that in a lot of organizations.
We're picking up here right where we left off in the last episode.
I have seen some shifting in how organizations are measuring performance now. It's much more behavior-based. It's more, it's still balanced with results. But some are doing a really good job of really looking at measuring behavior, leadership behaviors. What are the instances? Where are we seeing it? Is it repeated? And they're digging into that, which is super cool. I wish more organizations would follow suit.
Yeah, there's one thing to have key performance indicators, but another thing that needs to be its partner is key behavioral indicators. Measuring it is hard.
It can be done, but yeah, it's not easy, but it requires effort.
And the effort is something that maybe it's through the research that's being done that we can demonstrate bottom line impact of it.
Yeah, I know for me personally, when I have worked for leaders who cared about me, and I knew they cared about me, they were vulnerable, I was vulnerable, I would go to the end of the earth for them. Leaders who were leaving me in their wake, they didn't care. Just because I have my own personal integrity, I still worked very hard and I still accomplished a lot. But it was for me, it wasn't for them. Mm-hmm. And I think part of my job as an employee is to help my leader look good. And it's really hard to make some of them look good, like the guy who demanded my respect when he continuously disrespected me. Yeah. I'm not going to work real hard to make you look like a good leader because you're not one. So it's interesting. When we think about leading in outside of leadership and outside of work,
yeah.
Is it different? What is it? How does it differentiate? How does it feel? How does it work? Does it work differently? What do you think?
So leaning in with family, or leaning in with your church group, or leaning in with the community. Leaning in starts with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can talk about it differently, it seems, when we're talking about it in a business setting. But in a family setting, where it's already intimate,
mm-hmm.
in a friend setting, it's already intimate in the sense that you know each other on a level that involves more of your life than just your 8 or 9 to 5 or 12 to 12 or whatever it might be. So one of the things in leaning in on that level is where assumptions and expectations start playing a really big role, because it's personal right out of the gate. And how many times have we had somebody that ended up disappointing us because you assumed they understood what you expected of them, but it was never calibrated? How many times has a friend let you down because an expectation that wasn't calibrated hadn't been met? There was like the secret test, and they failed it. I think there's a big difference.
Yeah. It's so interesting you just said that. I belong to a group of women, and one of them said in January she was really sick and tired of being the friend who always makes the plans and always makes the phone calls. She felt like no one ever calls her, no one ever checks in on her, so she was going to test them. For the whole month of January, she wasn't going to call any of them. She wanted to see who her real friends were. And I thought, kind of interesting, because I have some friends that I rarely call because they call me. And if I don't hear from them for a while, I make the assumption they're busy, they've got lives, they'll call when they can. I might send a text if it's been too long and just say, hey, just checking in. But it was really interesting to me that she was going to put them through this test without having a conversation with them. I tried to encourage her to have a conversation, to say, hey, friend, I feel like I'm the one doing all the work here.
But
does our friendship matter to you? Because I feel like it doesn't. Because when I don't call, you never call. You're never willing to make the plans. But we all know personality differences. Some people are planners, some people are not. I'm a very spur of the moment. Hey, you want to go on a road trip? Sure. I make plans too, but planning is not my jam. And so it was just really interesting to me that she was willing to put all of these friends to the test. And do you know she got to the end of January and only one person called her to check in on her? All the other ones just assumed she was busy.
Because we established these patterns, not intentionally, it happens.
Yeah.
When you have behavior that repeats itself, it becomes a pattern, and it becomes something that you expect.
Yeah.
Without calibrating that that's really a pattern that this person is interested in sustaining in this particular case.
Yeah.
And so there's this notion of contracting, even in the friendship, saying, you know what, we're all busy, so if we're not going to count on just one person bringing us together, or whatever it might be. But think about how often established patterns don't get checked.
Yeah. And I asked her, I said, I asked the evidence question. Do you have evidence to the contrary, where they have called you, where they have made plans? Well, yeah, but that doesn't count.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So you do have evidence that is readily accessible to you, but you discount it because that doesn't matter, because you're doing it most of the time. But her story was, I do it all the time and they never do it. So it's interesting how we lock into our stories, even when we have instant evidence available that that is not true. It holds true to the point that you're willing to test your friendships. Fascinating to me.
So you have to think about that. Think about the assumptions we make of why friends or family or acquaintances are doing, acting the way they are. And we just go on about our business. And we might even start feeling the resentment or loneliness because nobody's called, whatever it might be, and we leave it untested. Or, worse yet, we put everybody to the test.
Right.
And they don't even know they're being tested.
And they don't even know it.
If we do not calibrate our expectations, if we don't test our assumptions, there is so much that can be lost, so much that can be missed in the relationship, be it work or not.
Absolutely. And I think your point to the patterns, I sometimes hear a friend say, well, she hasn't called me. Like, what's wrong with your fingers? You can't pick up the phone and call her? She's the one that always calls. Okay. But you could call her. It's not just a one-way street. It's just fascinating to me how people get so riled up in a relationship, friendship, sisterhood, whatever, and the usual pattern of this person usually calls me and they don't, and like, you're ticked off about it. Instead of just picking up the phone and going, hey, friend, I haven't heard from you in a couple of weeks. Just wanted to check in. Is everything okay?
So we could take those. That's an interesting thing. If you start feeling ticked off about something, use that as a trigger for pattern interruptus. I mean, you think about it. Damn, this usually has happened by now. Well, maybe something has to interrupt that pattern. And double checking, just doing the check-in.
Yeah.
The more we talk about this, the more I'm seeing scenarios where that has so played out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it plays out in family situations. Well, they always have Thanksgiving dinner. Why would I want to? I'm not even going to make any other assumption. Or they're always the one that calls to rent the cabin in the summertime or whatever.
Yeah.
You think about what's going on, what has always been this way. And what if you were just to take advantage of the moment and say, you know what? I'm just going to test that this is still okay with the person who is at sort of the point of the spear on the whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a trigger.
Absolutely.
Pattern interruptus. Maybe I should copyright that.
Copyright that one.
I'm kidding.
But I think it's important to look at is, to your point, when you're questioning, when you're wondering, when you're getting upset, is, well, can I take the rein here for a minute? What can I do to check in? What can I do to check on the situation? It's interesting. And then, of course, we get all the emotions wrapped up in there, and we get all the stories that we start to fabricate. And off we spin into our own little minds.
So when we start fabricating those stories, they really are trying to help us maintain the status quo, even if we're not happy with it. It keeps us on some kind of solid foundation.
Our brains are wired to keep our life easy. So when we start to buck the trend, so to speak, when we try to build new habits, when we try to do something different, our brain is like, whoa, no, you don't need to call her. She always calls you. Don't break that pattern. We don't want to start something new. It's human nature. It's our brain at work. Our brain wants to make our lives easy. And when we do something that's not a habit, that's not a usual pattern, our brain is like, whoa, what's going on, man?
There's another piece to that too, then, is that if I'm comfortable with the pattern, I really don't want to mess it up. Excuse me.
And then when the other person messes it up, that's when the problem comes in.
My goodness.
If I call you every Friday and I don't call you, you're like, well,
why didn't you call me?
Why didn't you call me?
But I wouldn't reach out to you.
But,
actually, I would.
You would, but, like other people would be like, oh, I must not be important. She found something better to do. She has different friends. It just spins out of control for some people.
Yeah. It'd be interesting if we could set up our own limiter. Saying, okay, I'll go to the second iteration of the story behind why that was supposed to happen didn't happen, and then I'm going to interrupt my own pattern. Say, wait a minute. I'm going to say, shut up, both of me. All right? You can't go on like this. So just stop it.
Yeah. For a very, very long time, I had a hard time asking people for help because I was often let down. My story was I was always let down.
Okay.
But I was often let down. People wouldn't show up. They would show up wrong. They wouldn't show up at all. They would forget. They weren't capable of helping, whatever it was. So I just stopped asking because my assumption was, you're going to screw this up for me. I can screw it up on my own. I don't need your help. So I stopped asking for help. And it might just be as simple as, I need help moving. I can hire that out. Forget it. I don't want your help because you're not going to show up anyway. I need help doing math homework. You're not going to show up, so I'll figure it out on my own. So there was a pattern of people not showing up when I needed help or when I asked for it. And so I stopped asking. I'll figure it out on my own. Forget it. I don't want your help. I don't need your help.
Yeah. The power of reflection in all of this.
Yeah.
Reflections and patterns and triggers and assumptions and expectations. All I want to do is just have a conversation, for crying out loud. But that's what goes into it. Having a relationship, even just in that moment of the conversation, at the checkout, whatever, being able to be fully present.
Yeah. And you think about, even with your friends and family, difficult conversations. And how many times do you run a scenario through your head before you just pick up the phone or you go see the person you need to have a conversation with? How's this person going to react? What if I say this? What if I say that? They're going to say this, and then I'm going to say that, and I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say that. And you figure it out 52 ways to Sunday, and then none of that happens, and it's something else that you didn't prepare for. But I worked with someone who I found her very fascinating because she would come up with an idea, and she'd just pick up the phone and call people and share her idea. It was half-baked at best. And I thought, wow, you are bold. And she would call anyone. I mean, she was calling senators because she had an idea on something to do in their community. She'd just pick up the phone and try to get a hold of a president of a company. And her ideas were barely baked. I'm thinking, wow. But people responded to her. It blew my mind. But I thought, how many times have I hesitated to call a client back? Because I got to think through the conversation. I got to have everything planned. I've got to do X, Y, and Z, when in reality, again, I can plan it 52 ways to Sunday and none of that mattered. So pick up the phone and call. Go see the people that matter.
I would like to bring up some of the more difficult conversations that you and I have chatted about, not conversations between us, but I'm going to go toward family and a couple of things that are tough for anybody. Approaching a parent who needs to stop driving.
Mm.
Or what we've talked
I haven't had to do that one yet.
Okay.
I dread the day.
Yeah, right. But so these are dramatic, but a great time to practice is now. But the other one, this whole notion of preparing yourself and your family for when you aren't able to take care of that stuff anymore. And being able to have a conversation, even as a young person, early in the career, early in the family. It maybe don't even have children, maybe not, no partner, but thinking through and continuing to maintain clear definition of what the next of kin are going to need to know, and what they're going to need to do when that situation arises. Even for young people to be having, I'm considering us young as well. Absolutely. Because until we're not here, we're young. How's that? Okay. But being able to have the difficult conversations about things like estates and trusts and wills.
Yeah.
Because it's really, really important. And when it's important, when it's really, really important, somehow it also becomes really, really hard to talk about. So leaning in first to self and then being able to lean into that conversation with whoever are so vital to the quality and integrity of the conversation.
Yeah, I'll do the shameless plug. Again, not a paid advertisement, but the material that Carla's referring to is called a knock box, a next of kin box. And it is an amazing help to anyone who's trying to do the estate planning. And it's got everything from pet insurance to where keys are, what your passwords are, what your bank accounts are, everything you could possibly want, all in one box. Knock box, next of kin box. Unpaid advertisement.
The notion of having that kind of information available, you could put it any topic. The notion is that you have a reason to be focused on it. It's coming from a place of love, respect, mutual respect, consideration, concern. And even if it is a tough conversation, you want to reflect on that.
Yeah.
So I think being able to consider these things, the assumptions. I loved what you just said. I'm sorry, I'm going back, but that whole notion about how you run through 52 different iterations of how this conversation could possibly go. And then it doesn't even come close.
Right.
And you wasted all that time and energy and didn't just lean in.
Yeah. Exactly. It's funny because I've done it so many times. I've done it with clients, I've done it with friends, I've done it with family, I've done it as a leader. And every time, without fail, never goes the way I think it's going to go in my head. It's either the worst case scenario or the best case scenario, and it's always something in between. I don't want to encourage people to just blindly go into conversations either. You want to think about your approach because that first 30 seconds of a conversation really dictates the results you're going to get. So you do want to spend a little bit of time thinking about your approach to a conversation, maybe a few anticipated outcomes of the conversation. Really think about your intent. Why am I even having this conversation? What do I want to get out of it? What do I want for the other person? And then go in. Go in with a good heart and the right intent. And you're going to be met with probably a good heart and in kind right intent.
It's just about leaning in.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think if we wrap this up, when you think about leaning in, you really want to go back to that self-reflection and thinking about being attentive, being in the conversation, showing some vulnerability, and having some self-discipline around the stories that you're telling yourself, the stories that you're crafting yourself, and looking at not the evidence that's convenient, but the evidence that's actually real is really important when you think about vulnerability and leaning into somebody else's situation.
I'm Carla.
I'm DocShellie. We'll see you next time. You want to think about your approach, because that first 30 seconds of the conversation really dictates the results you're going to get.